Last year, an old RC submarine buddy who I met again at the Groton event, SubX 2025, he approached my table with a rather haggard look to him and presented me a 3.5 cylinder, which I obviously had manufactured and had been sold, and he acquired. The cylinder he handed me and explained was cracked, and which is a reoccurring problem which started about 15 years ago. The Lexan cylinders that I've been receiving from my source of supply would occasionally, not always, but often enough to be a problem, would evidence cracks over time, usually emanating from machine areas such as holes for retaining screws. Well, these cracks are of no consequence if they're in the ballast tank or even a dry space, because their hairline and in themselves do not present a flooding path. However, if such a crack crosses one of the internal watertight O-ring seals, then the pressure of the seal acting on the crack opens it enough to afford a leaking path. Well, that was the case with his cylinder. Well, I told Bill, since we go way back, I said, leave that cylinder with me. I'll take it back home, and I'll depopulate it of all the gear and put that stuff in a new cylinder. And that's what this story is about. The last stages of getting his watertight cylinder back to him. Basically the same thing, but in a new cylinder. So what you're looking at is after I was starting to do the checks for watertight integrity and operation of the ballast system, things have already been pretty well done, and just a few sniggling little problems remain to be resolved. So I'll pick up the story at this point where I'm in the final stages of testing and correcting things. All right. I've been making some fixes since the first in-water test. The big one was the pump. Specifically, the pump, when commanded from the transmitter, would not run. I noticed that the case of the motor was getting hot, so that told me that I was probably something blocking rotation of the motor. Maybe a previous flooding occurred and crud had got between the brushes and the commutator or the poles, or some kind of fouling on the inside. As it turned out, it was something else, but the conclusion was correct. Something was jamming the motor and keeping it from rotating. The low-pressure blower pump is controlled through an electronic switch which attaches to the back of the motor case, a very compact and efficient system. An idiot light on that circuit board glows whenever there's current going to the motor. That would light whenever it was commanded. So I took the removed motor and I hooked it up to a power supply, 11.1 volts, and controlled it through a servo setter. And sure enough, I would get the light every time I turned the rheostat to the blow position, indicating that the circuit was sending current to the motor, but the motor wasn't running. So that just affirmed my initial thoughts that there was something physically keeping the motor from turning. So the next step, obviously, was to find out what that problem was, if I could salvage the motor. The nice thing about these little pump motor units is that the pump can be taken apart. Here I've started to do that by removing the 3 diaphragm units in their swash plate away from the drive disc, which makes up to the motor shaft. I had assumed that it was just a cruddy motor. I found, in fact, the problem was the disc itself. Someone obviously had done some service on this and pushed the disc down too hard, where the base of the disc was actually hitting the top surfaces of the motor bearing, affording so much friction that the motor would no longer turn under the force of the power supply. I could turn it by hand, but it was very, very torquey. So that was the problem, and the fix turned out to be relatively a simple one. Here, the disassembled motor and pump unit clearly show the assembly. The drive disc, that white disc underneath my forefinger, was the culprit. You can see the top of the bearing on the motor, and that was making contact with the base of that disc, and that was the source of friction that was stalling the motor. It was a simple matter to reassemble the motor and get things back on track. So that problem identified, the disc was reinstalled to the motor shaft, ensuring a bit of a clearance between the face or base of the disc and the bearing housing, and I checked it with forefinger and thumb. I could rotate it easily. I then hooked it up again to the power supply and servo tester, and found that when the servo tester was rotated to the blow condition where the pump would run, the pump indeed ran, and ran with significant torque. So at this point, the two sub-assemblies were put back together, and the pump reinstalled into the cylinder, and again checked via radio transmitter for correct operation. I had a leak at the manifold. That's been fixed right here. And let's see, I got to make up the antenna like an idiot. From the receiver here, there's an antenna which should terminate at this lug on the inside here, right there, which then the lug goes through the bulkhead and terminates in this antenna, which is external of this SubDriver. So I got to make that up. And one more thing, I found that the channels on the transmitter didn't correspond to the correct operation. So I got to swap the leads to the receiver, channels 1 and channel 6. And that equates to channel 1 being the rudder, and channel 6 being the angle keeper for the stern planes. So I got to open it up. Well, before I can open it up, I got to pop the bulkheads. Now, since I got to get in the after dry space, you're probably asking, well, why is this idiot opening up the forward dry space? Well, that's because most of the bus line is wadded up in here, and I need it to be free running so that all that slack, which you see here, can then run through the conduit and permit me to slide this out. So that's what I'm doing right now. All right, get this out of the way. Got a straight run. And we slide this guy out like so. See all that slack there? Right there. I'm going to pull that motor bulkhead a little bit more. See that? Now I have access to this. I can disconnect the main bus, and then there's only one more connection, and that's to the ballast servo. And those are the only two connections that interface the motor bulkhead and its devices from the after dry space. So I got to change these guys. All right, after all of the problems I had identified had been corrected, the pump, which was stalled, I reworked the pump so the motor could run again. Of course, the linkage on the ballast servo went sour. That had to be replaced. The ballast servo system just crapped out because it was quite a simple mechanical problem. The push rod from the servo horn had slipped out of the horn. Well, that necessitated removing the servo, removing the push rod with it, and providing a replacement servo push rod whose Z-bend, which engaged the horn, just had a longer stem. That's all I needed to do. You see me at a pointing to the replacement push rod. But of course, it's a long reach in that cylinder, so I had to use specialized tools to unscrew the bracket that retained the servo, and of course had to use hemostats to secure gear, pull it out, and then after installing the replacement push rod, reinstalling the gear. And of course, I literally had to glue the retaining screws to the end of a Phillips screwdriver just to get them in there and started. I'm rather well practiced at this, of course, and the work went quickly. But it's one of those little bothersome things that, one, you're glad. I'm glad that I catch them before the customer, or in this case, a friend, is vexed with his problem. So I made the fix. Took me about a half hour. And once I tested the servo for correct operation, reinstalled the motor bulkhead and the battery, and a few other little problems were resolved as well. All of those were uncovered by my first attempt in the test tank, and this is the second and hopefully the last time I have to put it in the test tank to validate the operation of the SAS semi-aspirated ballast subsystem. Again, what I'm going to do is initially effect a blow once I flood the ballast tank from the induction side of the snorkel. Now the snorkel would be up here and air would come in, providing the sail is above the surface. Air would come in through this line here, and we'll trace that line, and it goes into a T. And normally the air would be drawn by the pump through this end of the line, this leg of the line. All right. Now, in the event the snorkel was submerged and therefore closed, and there's no air going to be coming through this line, in that case, the safety float valve, you see the inlet nipple on top of it, the safety float valve would take air from the dry space, actually both dry spaces, because the conduit here shares a path between the two. So the safety float valve would take a suction on the available air within the cylinder itself and discharge, or it would provide air into the suction side of the pump. And that's where this T comes in. It's either drawing air from the snorkel side or it's taking air from the available volume within the cylinder. Regardless, the pump is going to get air. It compresses and discharges that air through this line, which leads to the discharge side into the ballast tank and blowing the air out. So we're blowing ballast water either with atmosphere, or we're blowing air from within the available dry spaces. And there's enough air in there before the pump stalls to get a sizable fraction of the water out of the tank, enough to lift the submarine to the surface to at least broach the sail. That induction line, it then becomes available, and it breaks the vacuum as well as completing the blow with atmosphere. So the first of the two things we're going to do in the tank is to leave this induction open so we can test normal operation of the ballast system. Once we've affirmed that that's working without any leaking, then we're going to go ahead and blank it off with this little item here. And that, of course, will simulate a closed snorkel. And then we'll see how well the safety float valve does in gathering the air from inside the cylinder to start the blow. All right, so enough yuck. Let's get this thing over here. Of course, I'm going to need the cylinder, or the transmitter, rather. And bring the magnet so I can turn things on. Here we are. All right, going to turn on the transmitter, like so. We're going to turn on the cylinder. All the idiot lights are on. Good. Now, I'm ready to put this thing in the water. I don't see any bubbles. So what I'm going to do now is vent. You see the vent opening there. Okay, so the ballast tank is full of water, and I'm going to just broach the inlet side there, you see it, and do a blow. So the pump is now drawing air from that open nipple, which would be leading to the snorkel, assuming the snorkel's open. It takes, maybe 50 seconds to empty the ballast tank. But while I'm doing this, I'm going to submerge this like I had a leak in the induction line. So right now that pump is now pumping water into the ballast tank. You can see the slight distortion in there. And we'll get it back up here. Now it's taking air again. That's to test whether or not there's a leak in the pump itself. So as soon as that completes the blow, which will be announced by bubbles coming from, there you go. Now the ballast tank is thoroughly dry and the excess air is coming out to those open holes in the bottom. We take a look. We don't see any water in there. We're good. So now we can perform the second part of the test, which is to blank off, so to speak, the induction. This little piece of hose has a rod in it, which blanks it off. Being stubborn. There. You can see it there. All right, so we're going to repeat the test, but this time we'll be scavenging air out of the cylinder itself when we start to blow. First the vent. And now the blow. So now we're taking air, we're scavenging air out of the dry spaces. The model could be 100 foot down, it wouldn't matter. You can see how effective it is. Already nearly halfway blown, and that's plenty to get the sail out of the water. All right, since we've drawn a vacuum, if this cylinder is going to leak, it's going to leak now. So this does two things in this mode. One, it validates that we can scavenge air to blow the ballast tank, and identify any leaks not caught when the system was at 1 atmosphere. I don't see any gross flooding. So let's take it back here. I'm going to blow it down just to get the water out of the way so I don't get any false positives. And wipe it down. Let's take a look. All right, that concludes the test. All right, I'm done with this beast. All I have to do now is box it up and get it to the client. Well, friend in this case. I'm retired now. All right. And we're almost ready to take it to the post office. The cylinder, as you can see, has already been partially protected at each end, particularly the after end, where it'd be so easy to mush up those push rod ends. So these serve to keep actual forces from crushing anything. This will be wrapped in bubble wrap and then installed in this box. It should be good enough to protect everything against the gentle care of the United States Postal System. And there it is, ready to go to its new home.